This is a pocket watch, a ball standard from the 1890s. Heavy, precise. Its official title was the Official Railroad Standard Watch. Its face is clean, almost sterile. Black Arabic numerals on a white enamel background. No room for ambiguity. This object was not jewelry. It was an instrument of absolute authority. Today its ticking is lost in a global symphony of synchronized time, a single beat shared by billions. But before 1883, this object's predecessor would have told a truth that was fiercely, stubbornly local. Its noon was a physical event, a pact between the sun and the town square, not a number transmitted by a wire. Consider the reality of America in 1880. It was not a single temporal landscape. It was a fractured mirror of time, a mosaic of thousands of individual sundials. The Treasury Department officially recognized 300 different local times, but in practice there were countless more. A journey from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco was a journey through dozens of temporal realities. In Pennsylvania, the railroads operated on 6 different time standards. The Pennsylvania Railroad used Philadelphia time, which was 5 minutes slower than New York City's, but 5 minutes faster than Baltimore. The city of Chicago was a vortex of temporal chaos. Its city hall clock was set to local sun time, but the Union Station, just blocks away, operated on a time 9 minutes and 32 seconds faster. A traveler arriving from Pittsburgh would find his watch was 22 minutes faster than the clocks in Cincinnati. This was not a system in a state of collapse. This was the system. Time was a commons. It was an organic, living thing rooted in place. It belonged to the community that lived under a specific sky. The day's rhythm was set by the church bell, a sound tied to the sun's arc, not by a distant, faceless chronometer. Time was horizontal, a shared understanding between people. It was a language of locality. And then, on a single, quiet Sunday in November, that language was silenced, and a new universal grammar was imposed by force. The official history, the version etched into our collective memory, is a story of enlightened progress. It is presented as a clean, logical solution to a self-evident problem. By the 1880s, the continent was wrapped in a web of over 115,000 miles of steel track. This was the engine of a new industrial empire. Yet this engine was constantly at risk of seizing up due to the friction of incompatible times. The official narrative centers on safety and efficiency. Head-on collisions were a brutal reality of 19th century rail travel. The famous Kipton, Ohio train disaster of 1891, where 2 mail trains collided because an engineer's watch had stopped for 4 minutes, is often cited as the grim justification for what was done 8 years prior. The story goes that the public and the press clamored for a solution. And so the railroad companies, portrayed as captains of industry acting in the public good, convened. William F. Allen, Secretary of the General Time Convention, became the architect of this new order. He was not a scientist, but a railroad engineer, a man of pragmatism. The plan he championed was simple and sweeping. He divided the continent into 4 tidal zones, each 15 degrees of longitude wide: Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific. At noon on Sunday, November 18, 1883, a telegraphic signal was dispatched from the Allegheny Observatory in Pittsburgh. This signal, pulsing down the copper wires that ran alongside the steel rails, was the heartbeat of a new era. Railroads in every city were ordered to adopt the new standard. It was portrayed as a voluntary act, a gentleman's agreement for the betterment of all. The newspapers of the day celebrated it as a triumph of American ingenuity over the chaos of nature. It was progress. It was inevitable. It was simple. The official record closes the book there, satisfied with its own neatness. But the neat story is an illusion. The problem of railroad time was not new in 1883. It had been a known, dangerous, and debated issue for at least 40 years. Why the sudden, decisive action in that specific decade? The urgency feels manufactured. When you stop looking at this event in isolation and see it as a node in a network of other radical transformations, the pattern becomes deeply unsettling. The 1880s were not a decade of simple progress. They were a decade of profound and violent consolidation. Look at the surrounding architecture. The National Banking Act of 1863, followed by a punitive tax in 1865, had effectively outlawed the thousands of local currencies issued by state banks. It forced the entire nation onto a single, federally controlled paper standard, centralizing financial power in a way that was previously unimaginable. Local economic sovereignty was deliberately crushed. Simultaneously, the orphan trains were crisscrossing the country. From 1854 to 1929, this vast program uprooted over 200,000 children, stripping them of their names, their histories, and their local identities before shipping them west to become farm laborers. It was a systematic atomization of the population, creating a mobile workforce with no ties to place or past. And then the most deafening silence of all, the 1890 census. This was the first census of the newly synchronized nation, the first to use Herman Hollerith's electric tabulating machines, the precursor to modern computing. It was a document of unprecedented detail, a perfect digital snapshot of the American people in the immediate aftermath of this temporal re-engineering. And every last page of the public schedules was destroyed. The official cause was a fire in 1921, a fire in a building that was supposedly fireproof. Fire that was allowed to smolder for the better part of a day, with the records damaged as much by water as by flames. The one data set that could have shown us the precise social and economic effects of this great temporal shift was surgically removed from history. Maybe it's just a coincidence layered on a coincidence, but I have been in the archives long enough to know what a pattern looks like. The centralization of money, the atomization of the family, the standardization of time, the erasure of the data. Sunday, November 18, 1883. For millions of Americans, it was the day of two noons. In eastern cities like New York and Philadelphia, the sun reached its zenith and the clock struck 12. But then minutes later, they were ordered to move back. Time was reversed. The day was made longer by decree. In cities to the west, like Cincinnati, clocks were pushed forward, and several minutes of existence were simply erased. They vanished. This act was not legislated by Congress or any elected body. It was a corporate mandate. It was the moment that the abstract power of the corporation became a physical force capable of altering reality for every citizen. The Attorney General of the United States, when asked if the federal government had the authority to impose a new time, famously declared it had none. It did not matter. The railroads had the power and they used it. The reaction was not one of universal acclaim. The front page of the Indianapolis Sentinel that Sunday ran a headline, "The Sun is no longer boss." The article noted, with a dark sense of humor, "The railway managers have stolen a march on the sun in the future. The people will have to marry and die by railroad time." The mayor of Bangor, Maine, decried the change as an unconstitutional assault on local rights. For years, many cities openly resisted. Detroit kept its local time until 1900, with its public clocks showing two different sets of hands. This wasn't just an American phenomenon, it was a global harmonization. Look at France years earlier in 1859. The French government passed a law mandating a standard musical pitch of A435. Before this, tuning was a local custom, a regional voice. This law imposed a single vibratory frequency on the entire nation. It was a standardization of the very air itself. First sound, then time. The principle is the same, the replacement of organic local variants with a rigid, centrally controlled and uniform system. Before 1883, time was horizontal, an agreement negotiated between a community and its environment. On that day, time became vertical, a command broadcast from a central node of power downward, a passive populace. You no longer verified your clock with the sun. You verified it with the clock at the train station, a clock that obeyed a signal from a distant, corporate-controlled observatory. The umbilical cord to the cosmos was cut. This is the point where the standardization of time reveals itself not as a matter of convenience, but as a critical piece of architecture within the erased century. The period following the 1870s represents what can only be described as a brick wall in history, a fundamental reset. The old world, built on local charters, local currencies, and local time, was being systematically razed. A new, globalized, and centrally managed world was being built in its place, and this new world required a new kind of human being. To operate the new machinery of mass production, mass finance, and mass insurance, the individual had to be transformed. A person rooted in their own place, living by their own sun, is a complex, unpredictable variable. They are difficult to quantify, manage, and control on a national scale. For the new systems to function, the unique human had to become a statistical unit. To do this, you must strip away their unique context. Their labor, their very life force, must be measured by a universal, fungible metric. That metric is standardized, mechanical time. By forcing every man, woman, and child onto a single, unified clock, the system could now precisely measure, compare, and commodify human activity in discrete units, hours, minutes, seconds, that were identical in a New York factory and a California mine. A worker's day was no longer defined by the variable, natural cycle of sunrise to sunset. It was now defined by the abstract, unyielding tyranny of 8 to 5. This temporal grid was the essential, non-negotiable operating system for modern capitalism. It enabled the creation of national wage systems. It synchronized the stock exchanges. It allowed insurance companies to calculate life expectancies and annuities based on a vast, uniform data set of human hours. Time was not standardized for safety. It was standardized for the ledger book. It was the first step in creating a human being who was no longer a citizen of a place, but a resource for a system. We are born into a world governed by the clock. We measure our lives in its increments. Our ambition is to save time. Our greatest fear is to run out of time. We carry these precise instruments on our wrists and in our pockets, believing they give us control over our existence. But this sense of control is the ultimate illusion. We are merely following a script. We are living inside a temporal architecture that was designed and built for us in 1883, and we have mistaken its walls for the horizon. The rhythm of our lives, the 9-to-5 workday, the hourly wage, the 24/7 global market, is not a natural state of being. It is the direct legacy of a corporate decision made over a century ago to serve the logic of machines and capital. Now, as we wrap up this journey, I want to address you directly. Everything we've explored today is a massive, complex, and often unsettling topic. It challenges the very foundation of how we see history. But I urge you, always think for yourselves. Do not take any information, including what I've presented here, at face value. Cross-check the facts, look into the archives, and verify everything for yourself. I want you to take the themes we've discussed today as food for thought, something to keep in the back of your mind as you navigate the world, rather than taking it as an absolute, literal gospel. This is a perspective meant to spark curiosity, not a rigid doctrine to be taken too seriously. We have forgotten that time can be anything else. We have lost the memory of a world where noon was an event, not a number. We think we control our lives because we can look at a clock. But whose time are we looking at? The deepest question is not what time it is. It is what time has done to us, and that is a question only you can answer for yourself.